everyone. Welcome to our humble living room. We're the Mass of the Ages team. So you recognize me because you see my face a lot of the time. But to make big, amazing films, and especially to do Mass of the Ages society, we're going to double Latin Masses in a decade. You need a big, zealous, humble team around you. So these are the people behind Mass of the Ages, and I want to introduce you to them. We're going to have a conversation. And please join us in the chat. If you have questions, we'll get to them later. If there's audio problems, let us know. We're no Daily Wire, but we're just trying our best. And this is not really our cup of tea, but yeah, I hope it sounds all right. So going around the room, we have Mike Hogan here. He is a editor, producer, creative. He does a lot of video production for us. Currently working hard on episode 3. We have Margot. She's our executive assistant. Then we have Jake. That's his name. Jake's been with us since the very beginning. He's a producer, but also director of communications. Dan Driver is our director of operations. Christian, director of development. And Anthony is our finance guru. That's great. So that's who we are. Let me just explain what we're going to talk about. So Mass of the Ages has been here in this Airbnb. No, it's really exciting, actually. It's really exciting. Well, what should we call it? Like our headquarters? HQ. We've been strategizing over the next 10 years. We've been looking at 10 years from now, 3 years from now, 1 year from now. How exactly are we going to double Latin Masses in a decade?
And we figured it out.
We mapped it out, literally. So, what I want to talk about today is branding, rebranding the Latin Mass, because there's a difference between marketing and branding. Now, this is so weird, like having you guys here, because normally when I'm talking,
we're texting you
to
like
the camera, there's not people watching me talk to the camera.
Yeah. You're doing great, buddy.
There's a big difference between marketing and branding. So marketing is like, here's how you can get Latin Mass. It's like, oh, Latin Mass is, at 10:30 on Sunday. You read your bulletin. Marketing is like, here's all the features. Branding is about feeling. So it's the difference between features and feeling. So, when we were, after episode 2, when we found ourselves, this is really, actually back in episode 1, after Traditionis Custodes came out, we found ourselves at a turning point in the history of the liturgy. Mass of the Ages was now at the center of a conversation that's going to shape the future of the church. What's the future of the Latin Mass? So, that's a big question, and we just stumbled into it, in the Lord's providence. But we realized that the big problem right now with the Latin Mass is not people don't know the facts about it, or that the facts, you can read a book on it. Like there's plenty of good books. Like pick up Dr. Peter Kwasniewski's, magnum opus on the liturgy, or Dr. Schneider, Bishop Schneider.
Dr. Schneider.
Maybe he has a doctor.
Maybe he'll be a doctor of the church.
You have a lot of good marketing about the Latin Mass, and certainly we've done that with Mass of the Ages 1 and 2. The problem really is with the branding. You could really make an argument that the reason Traditionis Custodes came out that restricted Latin Masses was because there's a bad perception about the Latin Mass worldwide. There's someone close to Pope Francis that argues this, that, you can find this article, I forgot his name, but he said, really, the reason why Traditionis Custodes came out is because you had a few people talking about Vatican II. You had a few traditional Catholics who were saying, we are the true church. Everyone who goes to the Novus Ordo is, out of step. So the perception people have about the Latin Mass is really, really important, because what we've revealed recently is only 2% of practicing Catholics attend the Latin Mass. We think it's more, when we're in our bubbles, but when you look globally, when you consider all the practicing Catholics all over the world, only 2% are going to Latin Mass. And when we tell people, you just got to go and experience it, right? Maybe the branding and the marketing, maybe that happens when you step inside a Latin Mass for the first time. But the problem is, a lot of people's first time isn't enough. Well, you got to go for 5 weeks or whatever it is. We need to change the perception, not for the 2% who are attending, but for the 98% who aren't attending. And we got to actually move the needle. Right now, because the power is in the hands of bishops, we need to reveal the true face of the traditional Latin Mass movement to the bishops who are making decisions in their dioceses, and to the 98% of practicing Catholics who haven't attended a Latin Mass. So the last thing I'll say about marketing and branding before I throw it to you guys is, how many people here have an iPhone? Okay, you're all part of the cult. Okay, I have an Android.
Sorry.
That's all right.
It really ruins our group chat.
Group chats are terrible.
Yeah. Painful.
Everyone's familiar with Apple. Apple has a brand perception of like excellence and like just opening an iPhone, like the way it's packaged, the suction, the paper. It's amazing. But Apple wasn't always the brand it is today. They've spent a lot of money and attention and language to get the brand they have today. They originally, they've always been, competitors with PC. And if you go back in history and look at Apple's marketing, I don't know if you guys remember the PC and Apple commercials.
Oh,
where
yeah.
you have like
You mean
Justin Long.
Microsoft?
What did I say?
PC.
Oh,
We get it.
Yeah,
We get it.
okay.
We get it.
You have Justin Long, who's like a cool guy, and he's Apple. And then you have this stuck-up businessman who represents Microsoft. They didn't have that good branding beforehand. If you rewind the clock several years, Apple was not doing well at all. They had an ad when they were trying to promote like their first or second Mac computer. It was an ad in the magazine that just listed all the features. And their features, in large part, were better than Microsoft. They just had a list of features. And they weren't selling anything. Now, Steve Jobs came in, and we all know the history after Steve Jobs, kind of reimagined Apple computers. But the ad that came after that, all it was a Mac computer, or it might have not even shown the computer, just the logo, and it just said, think different. And it was so simple, and it was a new way to think about it, and it was a winsome way to think about it, and then the rest is history. They sold, like, so well. So branding is about what people feel about a certain thing. So my contention, we'll get your guys' opinion, like, maybe you disagree, but I think the perception people have in their mind, like the picture they have of the Latin Mass, is negative. It's like an angry person in the shadows who's complaining and pointing fingers. It's old ladies who are telling you you're dressing wrong. And it's people who are like, join us and be angry with us and complain with us. And that's not a winning approach. Yeah, the Latin Mass is beautiful, but the perception people have about it isn't. So when you tell us more about yourself, like how you discovered Latin Mass, I would also love to hear about your perceptions about it. So who wants to jump in first? Who are you? How did you view the Latin Mass?
Yeah, I'll jump in for sure. I grew up in a conservative diocese. I'm a convert, but I converted when I was 12, so I think grew up is still an apt phraseology. And my parish had the Latin Mass as soon as Summorum Pontificum came out. Like, they were just immediately on board. And I converted 1 month to the day after Summorum Pontificum came out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I was, quote-unquote, raised in a parish where
That's awesome.
the Latin Mass was always an option. But I, like so many people I've heard from through social media and email and, talking to people around the country as we travel, I just thought it was, Mass in a different language. I didn't have this perception of it as stuck up it was at an odd time at my parish, but I thought maybe that was just because not as many people attended it. I think there was like a tangible break where like the Latin Mass became really popular through online movements, YouTube and social media, whatever. It became really popular, which is a great thing. But then all of a sudden, I was hearing about it as divisive or bitter trads or any of the stereotypes you hear now. So I think tracing that stereotype exists. It's based in truth. I've met people who, whatever you want to say about it, wear the funny hats or, dress like it's the 1950s or whatever you hear. Like that there's some truth to that. But the kind of like angry, you're mad at the world, I think is traceable back to, 5 years ago. And I don't see it as really existing before then, which I think is interesting because it's like pick your poison, right? Like you get these guys who are evangelists of the Latin Mass and they're bringing so many people in.
Yeah.
So it's good marketing, but the branding is terrible. And I think before maybe there wasn't really a brand. If you knew the Latin Mass in 2007, it was probably just like kind of on the down low. And now that it's this big global hot button topic, I mean, it's kind of bizarre in a way that only 2% of Catholics attend it, but everybody's talking about it. The Pope is constantly legislating on it. That's a recent thing. So distilling everything I just said down, I think, A, it's a recent thing. B, the stereotypes are based in truth. I know some people who like fit the bill, but just like any stereotype, like it gets overblown, right?
Like if you think about people who, so if we're taking Traditionis Custodes as like mentioning the stereotype of rejecting not just the reforms of Vatican II, but the council itself, if you were to throw a number out there, like how many traditional Mass-going Catholics do you think reject Vatican II?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're kind of uniquely disposed to talk about it because we've traveled the world meeting
Sure.
these people. Like we've been to these parishes, we've been to, the institute parishes and the fraternity parishes, the diocesan
And we've
parishes.
talked with pastors.
And we've talked with pastors, we've talked with just people in the pews. The overwhelming majority, in our experience, of these people in the pews are just moms and dads who think that this is the best path to get their kids to heaven and to obey the teachings of the church. Like at my TLM, we don't all like gather for coffee and donuts afterwards and be like, you know what's terrible? Vatican II. Like, we don't talk about that. We're like, hey, how was your soccer game yesterday? Like,
to be honest though, like Dan and I have been at a parish and eating donuts and talking about Vatican II and like defending it. So it does exist.
it exists for sure, but I think that to answer your question about, but putting a number on it, I mean,
Yeah.
I'd say it's less than 1 out of 10. Like it's
Yeah,
it's
I
a
agree with
loud
that.
minority of people. But I was talking with my wife about this the other day, and I'm curious to see what you guys think, because I think everybody here has like come from either a different faith or, sort of reverted, so to speak, from like the Novus Ordo-y way into the traditional Latin Mass, and like there were weird people at my Novus Ordo Mass. Like the idea that the only mean or bizarre or bitter person you're gonna find is at a TLM is like it's not how the world
Well,
works.
just to
Like,
underscore it, like let's say that 20% of people who go to the Latin Mass reject Vatican II. Well, what would you cancel that right because of that 20%?
yeah, so
When you consider like most Catholics who go to the Novus Ordo week after week don't believe in the real presence, or
So,
half of them.
I wrote an article for 1 Peter 5 about this, and I was sharing it with Dan. We were talking about it, and I don't remember it like word for word. I don't like quote myself. It sounds kind of pompous, but
As I said,
But I
and
did have,
Twice
but
as
I did have kind of a funny line that was like, so let's say all the stereotypes are true. It's 100 out of 100 at TLM. Like, I'd still rather talk to the guy who dresses like it's the 50s in a funny hat, who only talks about Lord of the Rings, than be at a parish where nobody believes in the true presence, right?
Yeah.
So even if you take the stereotypes to the extreme, which they're not true in the extreme, I still think you're talking about a difference in category of like, oh, the people at that Mass are bitter. It's like, well, the people at this Mass in large quantities don't believe the core teachings of the faith. It's like we're comparing apples to oranges.
And the last thing I'll say before I, hey the rest of you, like if you really explain to people the difference between the event of Vatican II, the documents of Vatican II, the intentions of Vatican II, the implementation of Vatican II.
Yeah.
Like, I really don't think.
Well, there's a great film that
So many-
explains this.
Yes, if you're interested, message part 2.
Well, part 2, and then episode 3, we're actually getting into like the global picture of these Catholics and
Yeah.
the Latin Mass movement globally. So I do think it is a tiny, tiny minority of people who reject the documents of Vatican II who go to Latin Mass.
Yeah, it's a hasty generalization for sure.
Who feels a fire in their bosom that just you have to speak right
Don't
now.
say bosom on a live.
We'll get canceled.
I'm trying to get this kicked off YouTube by you. No. Anyway, for me, I came to the Latin Mass from reading books and watching certain YouTube channels that explain the Latin Mass, and I had always gone to the Novus Ordo Mass and didn't really know Latin Mass existed, but then my parish lost a really good reverend pastor, and we got a new one who was less reverent. I started learning about the Latin Mass around the same time, and I was just blown away with how much was lost, how many like different prayers were lost, how much the liturgical calendar was changed, and
How did you learn that?
through reading different books, especially from Dr. Peter Kozlovsky, and watching Taylor Marshall's YouTube videos where he explained a lot of things about the faith and even Vatican II stuff. It just helped me to see all the stuff that was taken away, and I got really passionate about like just all the different prayers that were taken away. Like my favorite prayer at the Latin Mass is the Judith May psalm at the beginning.
Yeah.
The
It's
prayers
so
at the foot of-
fitting.
It's
so
so
good.
fitting. It's so fitting for the priest to begin saying, "I will go unto the altar of God, and to
Yeah.
God gives joy to my youth." It's so fitting. That's so
That's
much
right.
fitting. Rather than at the Novus Ordo, too much of the time the priest just kind of like greets you, it's like, "Good morning, how are you doing?" Or what was it? And I just love like all the different prayers. I love diving in and seeing how the Confidio was rewritten. Even
I wonder too if that, like, I've talked to a lot of people who it's the experience where they feel like when they discovered the Latin Mass, that it's like this treasure trove
Yes.
of stuff that was like
It's like-
taken away.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes me think, again, like if we just say the stereotype's true for the sake of argument, it's like, well, don't those people have a reason to be bitter? Like, if you've discovered that all of this, like if you flip that on its head and you've been going to Novus Ordo Mass your whole life, and then all of a sudden it's like, by the way, this Mass is now in Greek, none of the gestures you used before are going to be there, all the readings are different, all the prayers are different, everything that you grew up with was taken away from you, wouldn't you be a little bit bitter? Like,
Yeah.
I can almost understand. I
Yeah.
don't think bitterness is the way to.
It's understandable.
It's
right?
not the way
It's-
to people's
it's
hearts. It's not
frustrating.
good branding, but
Yeah.
I
it's
think it's
frustrating when you
understandable.
realize how much was lost. And even for me, like one of the things I was trying to do, I was trying to go back and forth between the two forms of Mass first. I didn't want to give up the Novus Ordo, how I was raised, it's what I knew. But then I got really into the liturgical calendar because I am such a liturgical nerd like that. And
Yeah,
so
you
for
are.
me, once I started like getting in, I started like noticing I was trying to go back and forth, but I'd be like reading my Mass and I'd be like, oh, it's this feast day here for the Novus Ordo, but for Latin Mass, it's this feast day. Or I would see that Christ the King was changed, or some of the feast days, especially after Christmas, were different. And I was like, okay, what is going on? And eventually, for me, I had to come to the point where, like, I had to just choose one and stick with it because I'm OCD and love just following the liturgical calendar to a T. So I was like, I'm just gonna stick with Latin Mass because it brought so much peace to my soul. So even though, like, it might have been like through watching maybe more controversial figures like Taylor Marshall, if you want to call him controversial. But he was the one who really opened my heart and my mind to the Latin Mass and helped me to really understand it. And
What was your first Latin Mass like?
I can't even remember it now because it was like probably 5 or 6 years ago. But it was probably the typical experience where I didn't really know what was going on. But it was just so, like, it just felt fancy to me in a
Yeah.
way. Like, it just felt like so much deeper and fancier.
Question for you.
No,
Would you
what?
say that the first time you were blown away, or was it more of a gradual experience?
I was blown away, but it was both and. I was blown away, but not to the point where I was like ready to go exclusive right away. Because I mean, again, like Novus Ordo was what I knew. It took me a while to get used to the Latin Mass and to learn it and figure out, when you're supposed to stand and when you're supposed to sit and all that, especially between the low and high masses. But eventually, I caught on, and now it's just second nature to me. So
Yeah. It's kind of uncomfortable at first because there's so many different things that you're trying to learn, and
yes,
but then it comes down to why am I doing these different things that
yes,
are uncomfortable in the sense that they're different or new. but not new. It's actually old.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. The reason I ask is because so many people have these different experiences, right? Like,
Right.
it was, some people are not blown away the first time.
I really didn't.
Most
like it
Yeah.
the first time.
There's experience is very mid. You know, they just
Yeah.
come in and like, cool. The hype of
Especially if you go to a low mass the first time. Like my wife and I,
Yeah.
the first time we went, I had like read a ton of books about it, and I had these mentors who were like encouraging me. So I knew a fair amount about it going in. And my first one, my wife and I are in the back juggling kids, and
Yeah, low mass
I
could
can't
be
hear anything.
underwhelming.
This is a low mass.
Yeah.
And we left, and we were just like, "What the heck was that?" Like,
no way you left.
Well, the first
No.
He walks out.
Like, what a conversion.
The Baptist church has been great to us.
Oh no.
Oh, okay.
We value all perspectives here.
After the final blessing, Jake left. Underwhelmed.
my first Latin mass was the Feast of Christ the King, so it was very
Okay, yeah.
spells and bells and all.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and coming from not believing in God at all
Wow.
to believing in God, that made a lot more sense when you go from a novice order,
Yeah.
which I thought was even conservative and everything else, coming from not
Yeah.
believing at all.
Sure.
But then you go to that, and you're like, this is what you would really do if
Well,
you
there's just
really
like-
believe that God exists,
there's
and
just
you
like a
really believe
different-
that He's present
Well,
here.
you said that your first Latin mass, you were like doing photography or something for
Yes,
it, right?
I got invited to take photos of a choir that was doing, I guess, a specific chance for that day. They had a choir coming in from a nearby university to do it.
Oh, nice.
And, so they just hired me
They
to do
were
that. I
that
had no
bad that
idea.
they only wanted photos.
So I mean,
Yeah.
so I mean, you,
Photos of the choir.
Leave the shotgun mic in the car.
but I
Just
mean,
photos,
I think I did
please.
some sound too.
but I mean, you had that unique experience of not just attending the Latin mass just to attend it, but like you were just there just
It was
to
an
do
accident, yeah.
To,
It was-
by accident, you were just there to take photos, and then you ended up falling in love with it,
Yeah,
obviously.
yeah.
Mhm.
It was an experience for sure.
I totally had it easy because I converted from extreme hedonism and came to the Catholic Church just not knowing anything about the faith except for having this.
I'm with you.
I grew up with my mother who is Irish Catholic and my dad is not even baptized, and so we went to a Novus Ordo parish, and I drifted away shortly after the priest ran away with the headmistress of my Catholic
Sure,
school.
yeah, that'll do it.
So it was just like, okay, this is all baloney, to use an American expression. And
You don't have baloney.
An American expression. What is that?
it's
Thank
like
you.
American Italian. I don't know.
Thank you
like,
for using that.
I think they call
Yeah.
it mortadello in Italy.
Okay.
So,
when you say baloney, yeah.
Yeah, so I think
You're-
it's more of
you're
an
speaking
American.
our language.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I really
you know.
related with that.
St. Paul says, "Be all things to all men." So I'm just trying to appeal to you guys. So I converted, and I didn't know anything about the faith, and I landed pretty quickly into a traditional Latin mass, and I was one of those kind of crazy converts where everything was mystical,
Yeah.
and so before my first traditional Latin mass, I had prayed the chaplet of Saint Michael, which attached to it is these promises that an angel from each of the 9 choirs would assist you at mass, and it was just a super powerful experience.
Yeah.
And I was reading a small devotional that said, pray this prayer 3 times and you'll get an indulgence for 6 days. It was, Lord, I am not worthy that thou should enter under my roof. And in the traditional Latin Mass, I saw that prayer was baked into the liturgy 3 times. So I was like, I'm getting an indulgence for this.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, at the
Nevertheless.
so everything was just connecting, and it just was something that my heart was naturally drawn to. And then the history of it, because I came from extreme hedonism, believing in relativism, believing that relativism was the absolute truth of this world, which doesn't make sense.
Hey, it's not a contradiction.
Yes, it is a contradiction. That's the point.
point.
Yeah. So coming into it, just seeing how everything fit together, and that I had so much to learn, and I was out of my depth. I was like, I'm a child again. I have to learn a language. I have to be fed. I have to sit with my mother.
Yeah.
Great, let's do it. This is
Well, I
my
think-
chance at a second life.
So that's an interesting, almost segue, back into the point about branding, because, all of us as we're sharing these stories, nobody was like, I really had to overcome the fact that I thought everybody there was gonna be mean and judgy.
Yeah.
People now are saying things like that. I get messages from people that are like, oh, what if I go and the people are mean? That wasn't something that back when my wife and I first started exploring it, that wasn't, nobody was saying that. Nobody was like, hey,
But
if you
people
go-
say it now, like.
But people say it
something
now,
happened.
yeah. So something happened. So part of what we're trying to do here with these conversations and with the broader movement as a whole, when you talk about branding, is like, what went wrong there? You know, because Latin masses have been exploding. We've seen massive growth, but on the flip side of that, you also now have this perception that the highest ranks of the Vatican they also have that perception. So like, what went wrong there between when you converted and felt like a child at this mass, and then I don't know, 2, 3, 4 years later, now it's like, this is just a mass full of Vatican II haters and we have to suppress it. Like, where's the split, and what do we have to do as parishioners and people, but as an organization, to fix the branding?
Yeah, there was like, for me, there was no like sort of sense that people were anti-Vatican II at the parish.
Yeah.
Now, among my group of friends, like, they knew Sede Vacantists,
Okay.
and they were definitely concerned, like, is that true? Like, because there's this concerning things that happened, you know, around Vatican II and
Discussions
with the creation. There was discussion going on, but there was never any kind of sort of social pressure. But I think large in part is the fact that since then, I converted in 2007, Summorum Pontificum
12 months.
times. That's actually my birthday that it came out.
Oh, really?
777 is my birthday. 7785 is my birthday. I converted the month after it, so
So we
converted at the same time.
That's crazy.
Now, but or a couple of months after, I think maybe September was actually it was end of August. Sorry,
There we go.
but
Wow.
like the internet at that time wasn't really what it is today.
Right.
Hyper connected.
Right.
Over like
Sure.
information overload, right? Now that we have the internet in all of its glory, where you can just pretty much download any information you want to your own brain by just watching a quick video, like, all of this information has just exploded, and it's caused a lot of discussion online, and those people have kind of bubbled to the surface.
Yeah.
Right?
for
I think
sure.
they've been there, but it's sort of fermented into this like hostile place. I think the internet is largely the place where the negative stuff is happening.
Well, yeah, there's like a psychological trick happening there too, because you're not seeing the reactions of people. Like Twitter, for example, like you can bully someone on Twitter and not, you know, if I bullied you in person, you would get angry or make a face, and I would react to that. Maybe poorly, but I'd have to confront
Right,
it.
yeah.
And on the internet, you can put out this video that's
You can
like,
hide behind your keyboard.
Yeah,
and not
yeah,
ever have to look
so-
anyone in the eye and say horrible things.
But
about
the other
them.
thing that's happening is people who are following the Latin Mass, even like casually, like they hear, oh, Pope Francis restricted the Latin Mass, and they look up something about the Latin Mass.
Yeah.
Well, they're seeing all these comments, and
Yeah.
they're seeing this infighting, and they're seeing thumbnails of angry people,
Yeah.
you know, pointing fingers at each other and yelling, and it's like,
So maybe
okay.
we just need to change the thumbnails.
Oh, that's it.
There
Okay.
we go.
Like-
All right.
Problem solved.
Margo, you change the thumbnails. We're gonna go back out. Yeah, I agree with that. No, not that part, but the last part you said.
Yeah, but I'd also be kind of interested. Like, I know, Anthony, you have kids who are like getting into college and you know, end of high school. Like, what's the perception of, like, they're now being raised in it, right? Because you take them. Like, what's the perception of that age group? Like, is it like the cool thing to do to go to the Latin Mass? Because like at my parish, there's tons of young people, but I don't know if they care about that perception. Like, I don't know if a high schooler it cares about the YouTuber perception of the Latin Mass. I'm kind of curious, like, what your experience of your kids growing up in it has been.
Yeah, so I mean, we pretty much discovered or started going probably about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And it's just been kind of similar experiences when you guys first started. And we went, and it's just like, there's no confusing, like, who the object of the prayer is, right?
Yeah,
It's not about the
Yeah.
experience, and it's real. And the kids know it, right?
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. Like, they latch on to it like
Yeah.
way quicker than I did.
They're
Like,
super quick, and even at a younger age than you expect. Like they know something special is going up there, and everything that goes on is feeding into that, and they realize it, which is it's opposite sometimes at Novus Ordo.
Sure.
We're just kind of like, oh, this song was better, or, or
Yeah. Yeah.
What would you say would be the key factor? If you could say one thing that it just makes the kids know that something's happening, is it the silence?
silence. It's just everything. Like you cross Tabernacle, Jennifer, like Adoran.
Yeah, there's like a
everything's
sense
in
of
the middle.
wonder. There's
Yeah.
like a mystical.
Yeah.
Something important is happening.
But
Yeah.
that's also something else that goes into brand. Like that sense of wonder can be falsely perceived. Because like I was talking to somebody who said, I went into mass and it was well before mass. Let's say 15 minutes, and everyone was quiet and downcast
Yeah.
and stern.
Yeah.
And I'm like, they're not stern and judgmental. They're praying. Like
Yeah.
like just because
Why
they're
is
not
no
like.
one waving at
Just
me?
because they're not like chatting you up in the
Yeah.
in the pew before mass, so that can kind of that mysticism I think can kind of play
That's good.
almost poorly into the perception. But if you think about like a fancy restaurant or something, the waiters, a waiter who has white gloves on and is bringing you a silver plattered meal, he's not like joking around with you and like. Buddy, he's stern, or like the military is a good example too. Like, I've attended a couple military funerals recently, and it actually reminded me a lot of Catholic liturgy because it's so ceremonial, and there's every little way that they fold the flag matters,
And
and
take it seriously.
and they're so serious and stern, and it's not that the soldiers doing that are bitter or angry people. It's that they take it seriously, and so I think what you're talking about, like. Kids latch on to it, but an adult might walk into that and see the mysticism and see everybody kind of quiet and stern. And even the priest, right? It's in the rubrics that the priest is looking down.
Right.
He's downcast, and he's remembering Christ, the suffering servant, carrying the cross. So there is this solemnity to the Mass, and that's not a bad thing, but the perception of that for, somebody walking in, it's not some happy clapping thing where you're invited off the street. It's like in Sister Act when they're like inviting people off the street to clap. Like that's not the experience. So
Yeah.
so I think that the mysticism kind of, I don't know. You're either attracted to it or you hate it. I think.
Do you guys think what is the 98% perception of the Latin Mass? Like, what's the picture they have? in
Of the
their mind?
Latin Mass as a movement, or of the Latin Mass as a liturgy? What
Like-
do you mean?
Attending the Latin Mass.
Yeah.
Like, why is that a hurdle for them?
Why would I attend something in another language when I speak English? And
Yeah.
why would I attend something that isn't the adopted right of like the majority?
It feels like the exception, like almost
Yeah.
whatever word is not as harsh as schismatic, like the fringe thing.
Yeah, it's
Fringe.
fringe thing. I don't
Yeah.
think for most of them, I don't think they think it's schismatic,
No,
but
yeah.
there is an anxiety of attending.
But like it
yeah,
is fringe.
Yes.
Like 2% of
I would say
Catholics
to
attend
use
it.
Pope Francis phrase, it's a peripheral. thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
go to the
Nice.
peripheries.
Good. Yeah.
We want everyone in the world to go to the peripheries and attend Latin Mass.
Yes.
Good.
I think
good.
with people I talk to, it's almost always that, and I can say this because it was my understanding of it. People understand it as like a movement or a group of people and don't even know, like they can't articulate to you what the Latin Mass is or why it's different.
What it is or why it's
It's
different.
more
Yeah.
about the movement or the people, which I understand to a degree because like if I thought, this church was full of these people I didn't want to associate with, I can understand that as an argument. But what I've noticed is that people who advocate for the Latin Mass talk about the liturgy. I like this
Yeah.
prayer. I like the reverence here. I like that the priest does this. And people who talk against the Latin Mass say, the guy behind me wore a funny hat, the lady in front of me said that my skirt was too short. Like, it's all about the people. And I think that's kind of indicative of what you were talking about. Like, little kids latch on to the Novus Ordo is sort of about us, and it's like man-centric, whereas the TLM is very Christ-centric. And so people who don't, through no fault of their own, because they were raised in the modern church, their perception of the Mass is more about the people than the actual liturgy. And that was certainly true for me.
Right.
Yeah.
I didn't have a negative perception of the people because it, like I was saying, it didn't really exist back then. But I didn't know anything about the Mass. I just knew that it was this group that attended it at this weird time on Sundays.
Yeah.
So what
Yeah.
people really need to hear and get just from like an impression they see online or the way we talk about it or a short video on it, is that the Latin Mass will bless you. Like it'll ramp up your spiritual life. Like it'll be a blessing to your spiritual life. I mean, for me, it was about the Blessed Sacrament. Like it was just, oh my gosh, finally a home for this belief, which is a crazy belief, but like, okay, that priest believes it. Just the way he's acting towards it. And when my 3-year-old daughter asks us as we're going up to communion, when can I eat God? Like, how old do I be
Well, what
to
were
eat
you
God?
saying
It's
about?
yeah, that's the right question.
You said something to us about like a dinner roll, like this should be different.
What?
You know what I'm
Is this a
talking
joke?
about?
I can't tell if I said
No,
something.
no,
like,
you were saying something about. You were like comparing it to like how you receive Christ should be different than how you receive this bread should be different than how you receive like bread at the table, right? Like there should be something visibly different about how we approach.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the convincing thing when I first came to the faith was... so when I first came to the faith, my closest friends immediately bought a copy of The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins and started reading it and pontificating from it to me as to why I'd made this mistake. And one of the things that they brought up was this quote about this atheist, and I think Craig might even use it, but they were using it as an argument to me. They're like, if you guys really believed in the true presence of the Eucharist, you'd be going on your hands and knees and crawling and begging to receive it. And so at the traditional Latin Mass, as a young impressionable Catholic, like I was able to see that was evident.
Yeah, sure.
People had to go up, and there's this barrier that you can't cross, and that's a controversial topic, but we're talking about the kerygma here, and this barrier is crossed by the minister of God, and you are receiving him. You don't take, you receive.
Yes.
It's different than ordinary food.
Oh my gosh, that is one of my biggest pet peeves.
I think Margo has something to
Have you
say.
got something to say, Mark?
Yes, that's one of my biggest
Wait, I want to
pet
hear a Christian.
Wait, no, that is
So
one-
the next
that is one of my biggest pet peeves is the whole receiving process. Takes so many people wrongly say that like, oh, you take communion or whatever. No, you're receiving the body of Christ. You're receiving the Eucharist, and what better way to receive the Eucharist than from the priest, who's in persona Christi. He's the Alto Christ. He's the Aldo Christ. Like we want to receive from our fathers. We don't want to be receiving from just
From Aunt Betty.
Well, and I like
Wow,
the
Betty.
child. I like that you said. I hadn't even heard you say it until now, but I like that you said you felt like a child again because Cameron has said multiple times on this channel, like you're receiving like a baby, like your father is feeding you the nourishment you need, and you're receiving like a child. You're helpless, and he is just coming to you.
When you're kneeling there and the sanctuary is in front of you, you do feel like you're kneeling up against heaven.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh my gosh, this sacred space that then spills over.
The
and you,
infinite
like, get to
divide.
receive
Well, and
it.
that
Yeah.
goes back
Bridged
to
by
what
Christ.
that goes back to what Anthony was saying. Like my kids are so impressionable when we're up there at the altar rail, kneeling down, and they're kind of taking everything in, and it doesn't feel like rushed. You're like awaiting the priest to approach you. I kind of like that I haven't really thought of the theology behind this, but I kind of like that the priest is coming to you. It's not like this line where you take and go. And that has a big impression on my kids. I think like the little kids kneeling down there with you.
Yeah, who's the initiator?
Yeah.
Like, we walk up to the priest, we handle the host, we go back to our seats, versus we come and wait for Jesus and receive him in our mouths.
So what went
it's
wrong
receptive.
here though? Like what we're saying makes sense. We all
Yeah,
believe
we're
it, but, like,
preaching to the choir.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
not, like saying
But
the
so-
things that everybody loves.
But like why
Let's get controversial.
why doesn't the 98% watch this stream and say, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to Latin Mass and
Well,
receive on my knees? Like
I
what
think
what
because,
went
too,
wrong with the branding that
I
it's
think
like
what
that's a good.
I think what happened too is that the Novus Ordo just became the default. It just became the normal mass that people go to. So it's just people don't. A lot of times it takes a lot for people to change what they do, and
yeah,
so
but that's true. But like in my diocese, I know a lot of people who attend an Eastern rite. They attend a Ukrainian Catholic church, and nobody's like, oh, those mean Ukrainians. Like
Well, because
it's
they're all angels. You know, it's super nice.
but they don't. But so what you're saying is true. It's the default. But with these other rites, like I've never heard anybody be like,
Well,
Pope Francis isn't
Bavarianites
saying
really need
we
to
have
get
to,
lost.
Yeah.
to repress the Byzantines because they're
well,
bitter. Like
well,
that's
yeah.
a perception
The
about
You're right,
us.
you're
I think the difference though too with that is that I think this is correct that the Latin Rite is the only one that has 2 forms of liturgy. I think.
Only one now.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Alexirandi, right?
yeah, I'm teasing.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the Latin Rite's the only ones, like meaning Byzantine, Maronites, Chaldeans, all the other Eastern rites, they only have one form of liturgy in their rite. So for them, there's not this like conflict, there's
Yeah,
not
that's
this difference between, and whereas Latin Mass is trying to juggle 2 forms of liturgy, and it's just.
Yeah, people feel like they have to choose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is different. Like, I mean, even for me, like I was saying before, like, I was trying to go back and forth for a while, but I was so conflicted because of the liturgical calendar, because of the different prayers that were left out of Latin Mass. I didn't want to. It was hard for me to go back to Novus Ordo where I wouldn't hear the Judith May Psalm, I wouldn't hear the Last Gospel, or some of the other prayers. And then, so it was just like, what do I do? And I was just so surprised. I didn't even know there were 2 forms of Mass in the Latin Rite for the longest time. And then when I found out, I was just like, this doesn't make sense. Why don't we all united as Catholics in the Latin Rite in one form of Mass?
So I want to go back to before we move on to the next topic, just to wrap up like the branding idea here. I want to go back to a tangible thing that we need to do because, like we gave these examples of Eucharistic reverence or feeling like a child at the liturgy. Those are great, and that's great for your personal prayer life and for your kids. But I would just focus one more time before we move on a tangible thing that we as an organization can do. Why is our branding gonna be different? Why is why should people watch the Mass of the Ages YouTube stuff, and why is that gonna inspire them or change their perception? How do we accomplish that tangibly?
I know Cameron has thoughts on this.
Yeah, just a few.
I'll quickly say something, and then if you guys want to, I think Mike and Anthony and Christian should say something too.
Call it out.
Yeah, call you guys out. But going back to my point earlier about since the birth of the internet, like and information overload, there's been a lot of great resources out there for traditional Catholics. Great intellectual, heavyweight philosophy blogs. Great printing companies that produce beautiful copies of traditional literature and manuscripts. Like, that's awesome. But there hasn't been something that speaks to the 98%, because those speak to the 2% that want to grow deeper in their traditional faith.
Yeah, I've always
It's
said
not
that,
entry
like,
level. It's
I've
not
always
front
said
porch.
that if you could just get somebody to read a Kwasniewski book, they'd be convinced. But
Hey, vote for me.
But you don't start like back to marketing and branding. You don't start with like here's a 400-page book on the liturgy. So like what can we do to just like you see a 30-second ad or you're curious about you saw an Instagram post about Mass of the Ages, like what can we do to it's like the front porch, right? How can we bring people onto the front porch and get them interested? Like what are we tangibly gonna do to fix what you're talking about?
What if we could make really like short, like 10-minute videos that would break things down and explain different parts of the Latin Mass?
Well, I think videos obviously a big part of it. Like we've
And they would be like really beautiful. They'd be like
Let me write this
animated, and they'd be fun to watch. They'd be entertaining. They'd be engaging.
I think it comes down to the popular level of like, okay, a student and a nerd and a scholar, like they eat these books up. And like traditional Catholics who first get hooked on the Latin Mass, then want to read the books.
Right,
It's
right.
like the books come later, but for the popular level, they're like scrolling YouTube. They're going on. They're Googling what's the big deal with the Latin Mass.
Yeah.
And then they have their phones out, and the popular level, the idea of the front porch of the Latin Mass is like popularizing it without watering it down.
Yeah.
It's like in a sense of like making it attractive, more like honey than vinegar.
Sure.
And it is about the films, because film is just a popular medium. It's a great way to communicate. It is about resources, like how can we make our apps better, our websites better, beautiful websites that are easy to use. Like it's all about that. And then over time, like, oh my goodness, our websites that promote traditional things
Yeah.
should look beautiful.
Yeah.
Like that's just
Yeah.
the first step, right? It
Yeah.
should happen.
Real quick, what is available for people right now on the popular level when they're looking for videos and stuff?
Yeah, like if you like Google like
Maybe our viewers can Google right now and ask
Yeah.
Well,
ask
there's-
him.
There is like beautiful Gregorian chant
Yeah, okay.
videos,
Yeah.
and
Beautiful.
those reach a lot of people because people want to, while they're studying, they'll listen to those.
Rosary prayer videos probably.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then a lot of like homilies, right? There's
Yeah,
a lot of
that's true.
homilies, and then there's a lot of news pieces that come out from the
Yeah, the
traditional,
latest
and that
Yeah.
thing to
But I sort of wonder, like, with those things, I think what's unique about a video project and, like beautiful apps and websites is, do those things, like, you might seek out a homily because you have a question about an aspect of the faith. Does, like,
The
a,
average person.
does, like,
Well,
a
sometimes the
15-minute
titles.
homily where you're just listening?
45 minutes.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
does that, like, really get you excited?
Yeah,
Does that
yeah.
change your perception of what's going on?
Yeah.
you
Right.
know?
I mean,
Yeah, extrinsic and intrinsic merit of the mass, which is a great homily to watch, but it's not your 98%.
Well, and the
right?
those nitty gritty details are like, I mean, most of these people we talk to in the pews aren't, like, people don't come up to us when we're filming and be like, oh, let's talk about, the filioque. Like, people are just going to mass.
Yeah.
They're just taking
Can we
the
make
kids to
that a
mass.
T-shirt though?
Yes.
Let's talk about the filioque. But, like, people are just going to mass,
Yeah.
right? And so I think a constant bombardment from the brand of, did you know this liturgical detail? I do think that the perception of, like, holier than thou or know-it-all, I mean, I can see why that happens, because it's like, we're just it's like what you said about Apple, we're just, like, spitting facts and
Yeah.
features,
Yeah.
and not everybody's interested in that. Not
Yeah.
everybody's a liturgical scholar. Some
They
people
just
just
wanna know
want
it's
to take
gonna
their
make-
kids to mass.
They want to know that Apple Computer makes their life easier.
Right,
It's just
yeah.
like
And
why
the
it works
Latin
on the
Mass will,
kids.
like,
Right.
bless
Yeah,
you.
exactly.
Just see it. That's
Yeah.
all you have to do is see it. Then after you see it, then you hear a bunch of experts talk about it, and they fill in the gaps. But you've already seen it, and
So
that's
that's-
why you're interested.
So that's back to getting people in the door, right? Which is the segue into our next topic before we take questions, which is we as an organization have come up with this lofty goal of increasing Latin masses worldwide, right? So that more people have access to this beautiful
And more people have accents.
and accents.
Especially British.
We want
They're
to
important.
increase British people. So
Make America Great Britain again. Yeah, I get it.
Oh!
Make England Catholic.
Make England Catholic.
Yes!
All right, touche. We get it.
With loyalty.
So we've announced this goal as an organization to increase Latin masses worldwide. So we want to talk a little bit about our roles and how we're doing that. Kind of tell our audience, what does that mean? Because it seems like
Yeah.
it almost seems like a lofty, unachievable goal, right? But we've given it a lot of thought. We've spent a whole weekend and
Well, I mean, right now, like how does a Latin Mass begin? Okay, God is ultimately going to rescue His church, and part of that we believe is restoring traditional liturgy.
I thought it began in Nomine Patris.
Oh,
Sorry.
Yeah. Where was I going? Oh man, I had this train of thought. It was like a locomotive.
it was really brilliant, guys, but
How does a Latin Mass begin?
We're gonna end it. One of the biggest hurdles that we're gonna help people overcome is we're gonna train more priests to celebrate Latin Mass. That's a really difficult thing. If you just picture yourself as a priest, just picture it. Don't practice being a priest, but picture yourself like learning Latin, because seminaries have failed priests. Learning how to pronounce Latin, learning all these new prayers. I mean, even just sitting in the pews with our missal, there's so many prayers, it's hard to even follow along. But not just the prayers, like all the intricate actions of the Mass. I mean, talk about overwhelming for an individual, and this individual is a priest who's really busy, he's at 3 parishes and whatever. So the biggest hurdle in front of us is training priests to celebrate Latin Mass. So that's the first thing. I think the long-term goal is changing the perception, because what's so shocking is that 70% of bishops are positive or neutral to the Latin Mass because they haven't restricted Latin Mass,
Right.
Publicly in their diocese. And so
And we know that because that's public information, right?
traditioniscustodes.info.
Yeah.
Keeps track of it. Yeah.
So you can look at each of the public responses on there. And so that's with a generally negative perception
Right.
that the online world has built with the Latin Mass. Imagine a few years from now when we have we've started to change the perception. We've made the Latin Mass, instead of like this fringe exception thing where people are, smarter or holier than thou, it's a thing that's like so rich. It's a treasure trove. And we're going to, and then at that point, now bishops are on board. So the long-term thing is let's move the hearts of bishops to protect Latin Mass in their dioceses. And then let's help priests overcome hurdles. Let's help servers and choirs. Let's be the ones to take the flag that says we're going to increase Latin Masses. We're going to put all our energies towards moving that needle. Not that we're replacing everything, because we're the front porch.
Mm-hmm.
We're about marketing and branding and resources, making it super easy. Just like a front porch is like, hey, come in. Come in and read a book by Kwasniewski or go to one of
Kwasniewski's in the living room.
Where's Flanders? I don't know. He's like in the wood shop or something. Who knows?
He's sleeping right now, but
But these resources exist, but the problem is they're hard to find. They're not branded well. They could be so much better. And imagine if it was under one roof. So anyone interested in the Latin Mass, curious about it, what is the Latin Mass? Oh, latinmass.com. That's a good place to start, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And they can take their next step, find a Latin Mass near them, watch this video that answers their question about communion on the tongue, So
Yeah, and
I think
we're
it's a
excited
platform.
about the things we're building on this website, on this platform. We recently released a pitch video where Cameron kind of details everything that we're doing, and you can see previews of it. So if you're interested, that's all over our YouTube and social media channels. But so we're all really excited about the priest training, but we have other ideas for this platform too. And we'd love to hear from people. Like, what do you want in a platform like that? If you went to latinmass.com, what do you want? Do you want a missal? Do you want to learn Gregorian chant? Like, what would drive you to come to latinmass.com? And we can build that out. Like, we have the team assembled now, and we have our ideas.
Oh, we have so many ideas.
so many.
Too many ideas.
But I think
All of them good.
I think it's also good to hear from people, like, what helps
Yeah.
your family. Like you have a bunch of kids at Mass with you. You drive a long way for Mass. Like, what helps in these different situations. So we'd love to hear from you guys about that. But one thing I'm really excited about is the idea of this TLM finder, a Latin Mass finder map, which we already have one on our site, but we want to make it global so anyone in the world can do it. And I like the idea of just like a click of a button. Like, it knows your location. You click like find a Mass near me, and it just gives you a list with the times. I think location is such a barrier for people, especially now with Traditionis Custodes. Like, sometimes it's secretive or not in the bulletin or whatever. So solving that problem for people, I think, would be a huge removing a huge barrier.
Yeah.
So that's one feature that I'm super excited to build out over the coming months.
What was the question again?
So what about what we're doing on our platform are you excited about, or what ideas do you have moving forward to remove these barriers for people?
I think just giving, just having the average person be able to learn when they want to.
Yeah.
I think that it's so hard for the average person to just say, okay, showed up at my first Latin Mass, kind of strange, not sure how I feel about it yet, but I want to learn more. I think I'm excited for them to just have an easy video format to just learn why, just as simple as why wasn't the priest facing me, right?
Sure,
like, I mean,
yeah.
just something as simple as that. He should be speaking to me, right?
Well, and
I
maybe a
think-
video like that feels a little like it is educational, it is facts, but maybe it feels a little less preachy than than just an
Yes.
article that's like quoting Aquinas or whatever.
Yeah.
Or you
Right,
have to
right.
watch this hour and a half like conversation about Ad Orientem. And it's like,
Right.
oh man, who's gonna like?
Yeah.
They just want a quick answer, right?
Yeah.
They're googling
Yeah.
something for an answer.
When I
Here's a
look at
3-minute video.
YouTube, I'm looking for the 3-minute,
Yeah.
5-minute max video,
Yeah.
just telling me something quick. If it's animated, points on that because it just makes it so much easier. So that's what I'm excited about. I mean, I'm still learning myself, right? And some of us are too, except for you, Cameron, of course. You got all the Latin down, everything like that.
We were gonna do a whole stream in Latin.
Yeah.
We told him not to do it.
Yeah,
Some
settle.
of them aren't fluent in Latin yet.
But that's what I'm looking forward to. Something that, and you've mentioned it before, but something that you could, that you want to share with people that you know,
Yeah.
with friends and family.
That's actually a
whatever.
really good point. Like,
Right.
Like, do you want to share the article on like a blank white website where they also have
Yeah.
a tab that like talks about UFOs? Like,
Yeah.
that's not really what I want to share with people, you know. So that's a great point. Just
I actually really like the websites that are about flat Earth and everything, how the Earth is flat. Like those are my favorite to go to.
Shiny aluminum foil hats, yeah.
Yeah.
No.
So that pretty much wraps it up for what we wanted to talk about. Margaret,
there
I don't know
questions?
if you've seen any questions that you want to pop up.
Did any of our wives comment?
Yes, mine
Yes,
did.
Sarah.
Wait, who is the
There's-
first
She
wife?
almost hit it. She almost hit it because I think my wife was
There's
like,
a zero.
that British guy. Dog. And I saw her hovering over the hide button, so I gave her a look like, what are you doing? Like, it's my wife. It's okay.
I think what we'll do is if there's any questions, we'll put them up on the screen and
Yeah.
we'll make Mike answer them.
Shout out to Kevin McCaffrey. If you're still watching, we say hi. He said hi
Oh,
to
hey,
us.
Kevin.
Yeah, we live with him.
Hello to Angela Erickson, one of me and Jake's mutual friends. One of her suggestions is to have engaging talks specifically about the TLM, kind of like a traditional version of Formed.
Yeah, I think.
Wait,
the-
can someone explain that to me? What is it?
So-
Form.org, like,
I
catalogs
mean, what is the
videos.
video idea, or what? What am
I think she's talking specifically about like what Christian was mentioning, like details about the TLM, because there's all of these kind of like scholarly articles and videos, but like somebody might be wondering, you know, why did the priest turn around 5 times, or the thing, you know, explaining things like that, but not in a like a
you know what's interesting?
preachy way, right?
So we've been putting together the priest training video, and like, you know, we've been watching other trainings online, also like reading other. There's like some like scholarly books on explaining the rubrics. So like compiling these resources to write our script, and what I was not expecting was to myself be moved at the explanation for the rubrics and things like this. And I think people are going to watch the priest training who aren't priests and learn a lot.
Well, there's so many little things, like we don't need to get into all the details now, but just one quick one of like when the priest approaches the altar, there's a specific way that he puts his hands on the altar, right?
Yeah.
He like keeps 2 fingers off, and that is supposed to remind him of Christ's 2 natures, and there's more that goes into it, but little examples like that
Oh, yeah.
you would just have no idea.
Like I was reading through, like when I would go through and like proofread the script, go through it, I'd like notice all these tiny details. Like the priest has to genuflect, but his like right hand has to be on the chalice, and his left hand
Or
is
like inside the corporal.
yeah, inside the corporal. Like all these like little minute details, and I have like so much more respect for priests who learn and offer Latin Mass now, knowing like all these like tiny details they have to remember. It's not just about learning
She says,
Latin.
yeah, but this is actually a point I was just going to make. So Angela says, but do like the Scott Hahn version. So if you do this, you have to be careful that you're not just spending an hour and a half like, did you know?
Yeah.
Like not everybody wants to learn
Yeah,
that way. Some
that's
people
true.
just want the mystical aspect of
Yeah.
it. So
But
Like you
imagine
said-
you could like almost like have a choose your own adventure, or I don't know how to describe it besides like you can click through images of the Latin Mass and then like click on
Wait,
things
that's a great idea.
that you have questions
Yeah.
about.
Wait, why don't we do that? That's a great idea.
All right, thanks, Angela.
Angela, you're hired. Come anytime. Let's see. What else will people say?
What did my wife say about me?
Is she on?
She's on.
Oh my gosh,
There's
I have too many
0% chance. No, that's
That's my
That
wife.
bridge.
That's not
This
Cameron's
goes
wife.
back to
yeah, it goes back to the convoluted
So,
relationship.
quick thought that came to mind as Margot was talking. She was talking about these little details, and I keep hearing us say these little details and did you know things. it was reminding me. At one point, I worked at Apple, and it brings us back to branding. Apple's thing is excellence, right? So that's
Yeah,
actually
that's
one of
right.
our core values as well. And so
We
when
stole it from Apple.
we did, we stole it from. Actually, my point is that Apple could have stole it from the Catholic Church.
Yes.
In all of the little details. So in the store of Apple, everything is ordered to a very specific way.
Yeah.
To their computers being computer screen, MacBook, being angled a very specific way. So you have to touch it and open it, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
it's all about like touching or like just the way it's organized, right? But you think of the priest and everything that they do is excellent, and it's for a reason. It's not for the person in the back of the church or even in the front pew, right? You may not even know, but it's there for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, and so it just reminded me of that point. I just wanted to.
That's
Yeah.
beautiful.
Well,
I didn't
another
know
one
it was
that kind of blew our minds when we were interviewing a priest and we hadn't heard of it, but he was saying, you know, the cassock used to be common, and now a lot of priests just wear like slacks. But a traditional cassock has 33 buttons, and as the priest buttons it, he's supposed to be meditating on each year of the life of Christ, and when he gets to the end, he's thinking about the crucifixion and, you know, the final days of.
And time to, you know, do math.
Right.
Or,
Yeah. So
or
that,
live, yeah.
and
Wear
you
the
know, if you're a
cassock of the world.
priest and you're you know sort of forced to do that by the rubrics, I'm sure that just like anything, it could get old and stale. But
A cool one is the priest 7 times says et cum spiritu tuo, and representing the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And there's a book that walks through like why this part is about wisdom and why this part is about counsel.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
the one right before, you know, the gospel is like understanding. And,
well, and like back to what
So
Christian was saying,
amazing.
just about even like layout, right? Like if a church is built facing east, that means the priest is facing east, and when he turns this way, he's going north, and there's symbolism in when Christ went north to preach the gospel to the Gentiles, right? So at the point of Mass where the priest is going to proclaim the gospel, he physically moves his body and turns liturgically north. And you may not capture all of that just like kneeling down and attending a Mass, but the Mass does catechize you over time. And I do think if you can do it in the right way, I think explaining these details to people does create a sense of wonder, as long as you don't overdo
And
it.
it's also never ending. Like
Oh,
this
there's
is
so
this
much.
is a lifelong
Yeah.
relationship you can
Yeah.
have with the liturgy. Like it's a lifelong like learning and being fed by the church theologically just through the way she prays.
Sure.
And that informs how you believe, and that's like
Well, Christian and I were
Essential.
doing research for a thing we want to post on Instagram, kind of talking along these topics, and it was about like in the end of the book of Exodus, God gives the Levites all of these seemingly insane provisions for this is how you build the altar, this is how you smear the blood, this is how you do, and it's so detailed. It's chapter after chapter after chapter, and like the penalty for not doing it the right way is usually death. It's like really, really intense. And so I think you can read from Scripture that this careful attention to detail and rubric is really deeply rooted. It's not.
And their idea of the presence of God was, it wasn't the real total presence of God. Like they understood the transcendence of God,
Right.
but the immanence of God was like, they had to think of it in an analogous way. Like it was, for them to realize that a host is Almighty God would have blown their minds.
Right.
So you imagine that kind of careful attention to do this, do that, and now we have the new covenant, and not only like the analogous presence of God or the God overshadowing the space, but no, this is the Son of God who is on the cross.
Wow.
And so the careful attention to we must have that, like it's and I agree with that. You don't need to know the reasoning for everything, but just coming back to a child, like at least they know that whatever's happening is really important because this is unlike anything I've seen. The way they're acting.
just a note on your Apple branding thing. And so we're trying to rebrand the movement. We're trying to
Thanks, wife.
make it accessible to 98. But in a way, like it should be essential to the Catholic Church to rebrand how it approaches liturgy and prayer. And I believe personally, this is my personal opinion, not anyone in this room's maybe, but that the church needs a rebranding, and that the traditional Latin Mass and the theology that's present within it and the rubrics that are present in it need to be a part of the rebranding. Like,
Well, the liturgy is the foundation for
Yeah.
it, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
the main source of, like, if you're just a Catholic going to work and raising your family, your main touch point with the church is Sunday Mass.
right, but even Apple recognizes that, because you didn't mention they have like a, I forget where it is, but they have a physical location where you can go and just hang out, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
And they modeled it, do you know what it's called? Do you know off the top of your head?
No, I can't remember.
They modeled it after Italian, like courtyards of cathedrals
They did,
and
yeah.
things. Because this would be in little rural Italian towns where they'd have a big basilica, church, cathedral.
Where there's tons of iPhones.
Yeah, they would have a market square. Actually, they call it the market square, right? Is that what they call
Maybe
it?
town center,
Town
town
center,
square
yeah.
or something like
But
that.
it was
yeah.
modeled after specifically the old conception
Mhm.
that the Catholic Church had, which was a meeting place where people would convene on a Saturday and sell their goods, and then on a Sunday they would parade and have the Italian version of coffee and donuts, which would have probably been coffee and what's gelato or something like that. I don't know, affogato, whatever they call it.
You say I forgot to?
Well, actually, affogato is the. It's actually vanilla ice cream with a shot of espresso.
Oh, okay.
But I did forget it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
That's
I should
good.
use that.
That's witty.
All right, so we're going to wrap up. It's getting late here, so thank you to everybody for joining. There's not really a graceful way to end these things, so we'll just say thank you. Head over to latinmass.com and you can
Slash.
Give.
Well, all right, I was getting there. I was gonna toss it to the fundraising.
Oh yeah, that.
If you head to latinmass.com/give, you can see the pitch video I was talking about. You can see sneak peeks of what our website is going to look like, the features that we're releasing, and you can sign up to give monthly. It's kind of like a Patreon style giving tiers where you can receive different perks for what you give. And we're excited to announce, if you haven't already heard, that we're now a nonprofit, so your gifts are tax deductible. So thank you to everyone for joining. We hope you go to latinmass.com/give to learn more, and we'll see you next time.
God bless.
Good night,
Take
everyone.
care,
Thank you. Thanks, wives.